Winning the NBA MVP sounds like the sweetest point of a basketball player's career, but sometimes, when you don't close it out when it matters the most, your season can go sour, and back in 2016, a little guard might have given us the best example. In the 2015-2016 NBA season, Stephen Curry didn't just dominate, he completely changed the way basketball was played and the dynamic of the entire league. It wasn't just that he was good, it was that he made the impossible look so simple that anyone could be like him. Pull-up threes from the logo? Normal. Step backs over two defenders? Easy. One-handed floaters off the glass without looking? Just another typical Tuesday night. He took everything we knew about efficient scoring and flipped it on its head. He was a small, skinny point guard who made a killing running off screens off the ball just to hoist up three-point bombs. He led the league in scoring with 30.1 points per game, but barely played in fourth quarters because the Warriors were usually up so much. He had the highest player efficiency rating, broke his own record with 402 three-pointers, and shot 50% from the field, 45% from deep, and 90% from the free throw line. There is no season from any player in basketball history that you could even compare to this. He was a flamethrower in sneakers, but also a smart, unselfish leader who kept the ball moving, celebrated teammates, and never let the spotlight change who he was. Time after time, the most efficient lineups in the NBA were centered around Steph Curry and a bunch of bench players. It didn't matter who he was playing with, as long as they were all bought in. And when the man leading the charge was the most revolutionary offensive weapon we'd seen, that was pretty easy to do. The entire NBA revolved around his gravity. Defenders stretched out to half court just to keep up, and coaches had to rewrite their defensive schemes just to survive a quarter with him on the floor. The 2016 Warriors weren't just great, they were a literal cheat code, like some up-down, left-right, A-B type shit. They started the season 24-0, the best start in NBA history. They finished 73-9, beating the legendary 96 Bulls record of 72-10. They had shooters, defenders, playmakers, but it was Curry who made the engine run. Every game felt like a show, Harlem Globetrotters or some shit. NBA arenas became concert venues when he walked in. Celebrities showed up just to see the wild thing he'd do next. Kids across the country started practicing deep threes before layups and yelling Curry when throwing a paper ball into the trash can. Curry had taken over the league, and it wasn't even close. When the MVP votes came in, he became the first unanimous MVP in NBA history. Every single voter picked Steph. It was a clean sweep, a moment in time that felt like the coronation of a new era. He wasn't just the best player in the world for this season, he was the most exciting, the most influential, and the most unstoppable. The league had never seen anything like this scrawny little shooter that came from Davidson. And for most of the playoffs, it looked like the Warriors were going to finish their historic season with the perfect ending. They breezed through the first round, stumbled slightly in the second when Curry injured his knee, but still powered through until the Western Conference Finals. There, they ran into Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook's Oklahoma City Thunder and got smoked onto their knees. Down 3-1, the dynasty looked like it might collapse right there. But then, the Warriors turned into the Warriors. Klay Thompson had one of the biggest Game 6 explosions we've ever seen. Curry dropped daggers in Game 7, and they came all the way back to win the series in 7. They were battle-tested. Heading into the finals for a rematch against LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers, it felt like the final chapter had already been written. When Golden State took a 3-1 series lead, most people recognized that this series is probably over. One more win, and the Warriors would become the greatest team of all time record-wise and with the title to back it. Curry would finish the first unanimous MVP season with the cherry on top. The dynasty was born. But then, history did a 180. Game 5 was the turning point. Draymond Green was suspended for a flagrant foul, Bogut got injured, and suddenly the Cavaliers had life. LeBron James locked in like never before. He played like a man on a mission, angry, focused, and totally unstoppable. He dropped 41 points, Kyrie matched him with 41 of his own, slicing through the defense and hitting fadeaways like he was in a video game. The Warriors without Draymond didn't look the same. Curry had 25 but fouled out late and couldn't stop the bleeding. Still, there was time. Game 6 would be the bounce back, but instead the collapse grew. In Game 6, LeBron did it again. Another 41-point masterpiece, Kyrie continued to cook in isolations, and the Warriors' offense became an ice cube. Curry shot 8 of 20, missed open 3 balls, and seemed rattled by Cleveland's physical defense. Worse, he started forcing things. Bad passes, quick shots, unnecessary fouls. For a player for his calm and poise, it felt like the moment was starting to overwhelm him. With the game slipping away, Curry threw his mouthguard into the crowd after fouling out, an image that became a meme afterwards. The Warriors had gone from unbeatable to vulnerable. And now it all came down to one final game. Game 7, Oracle Arena, every camera, every eye, every ounce of pressure locked onto the court. It wasn't just about one game, it was about two different legacies, and the game played like a heavyweight fight. Slow, tense, every point's earned. Curry had moments, sure, but he never found his rhythm, or anywhere close. He finished with just 17 points, going 6 for 19 from the field and 4 for 14 from deep. Nowhere near what the Warriors needed. And when it mattered the most, the Cavaliers took control. Kyrie Irving hit the shot, a cold-blooded three-ball right in Curry's throat with under a minute to go. Then came LeBron's legendary chase-down block on Andre Iguodala, and possibly the most surprising of all, the last-second perimeter defense from Kevin Love on Steph Curry, forcing up a bad shot towards the end of regulation. I mean, I bet these guys still have nightmares about it. And just like that, the dream died. The Cavaliers won the title. The Warriors, with their 73 wins, unanimous MVP, and highlight reel season, walked off the floor in disbelief. No team had ever blown a 3-1 lead in the NBA Finals, ever. And now the team that had rewritten the record books, the team that had Curry at the peak of his powers, was remembered just as much for what they didn't do. And while it wasn't all Curry's fault, Draymond's suspension, Bogut's injury, Harrison Barnes going ice cold, Steph was the leader, the face of the team. And in the biggest game of the year, he didn't rise to the moment like everyone expected the unanimous MVP would. He didn't control the offense, he didn't shoot the ball efficiently, he didn't close, and just like that, the greatest season in NBA history ended without a ring. It was shocking, it was painful, I'm sure, and it reminded everyone that in the NBA, greatness has to finish the job. Records are cool, MVPs can be legendary, but championships are what it's all about. The 2016 Warriors were immortal, until they weren't. Steph Curry had the league in the palm of his hands, but that finals loss left a scar. The chatter, all of a sudden, was quiet. Steph Curry wasn't a disappearing act. He managed to maintain undeniable legend status throughout his career, but the best player in the world, best team ever buzz, was clearly corrected. If you're watching this right now, there's an 85% chance that you're not subscribed to the channel, so make sure to change that for me. We're trying to hit 100K by the end of the summer, and I appreciate all you guys watching. The 2023 NBA season was supposed to be Joel Embiid's crowning moment. The year he finally silenced his critics, proved the haters wrong, including myself, and took what he believed should have always been his, the MVP trophy. For years, he was in the race, but could never surpass Giannis or Jokic. Instead, he wound up wounded and beaten by the time the award went around. In 2023, he flipped the script. He stormed through the regular season. Night after night, he tore through defenders, stacked up points, and carried the 76ers on his back. He averaged a league-high 33 points and added over 10 rebounds, 4 assists, and nearly 2 blocks. He wasn't just scoring, he was defending, leading, and overwhelming everyone in his path. He finally won it. Joel Embiid, 2023 NBA Most Valuable Player. Although controversial to some, he got it. He checked all the boxes of an MVP winner. He led his team to a 3rd seed, led the league in scoring, dominated at every twist and turn, and gave us some blockbuster moments in the meantime. Dude was on. Social media exploded, analysts nodded in agreement, not all of them, but many said it was finally his time. He had earned it, I supposed, or maybe just to appease the Joel Embiid fans amid the Jokic-Joel arguments. But there's still one more chapter left to write, because in the NBA, the MVP is just the beginning. Playoffs basketball and regular season basketball are damn near 2 different sports, and when the calendar flipped, what happened next was pretty tragic. And let's just say Philly is going to have to trust the process a little while longer. It started off quietly. The Sixers faced the Brooklyn Nets in the first round. Embiid played well, solid numbers, though not spectacular. Then came the twist. In Game 3, Embiid injured his right knee diving for a loose ball. A sprained LCL, the doctors said. He missed Game 4, the Sixers still ended up sweeping the Nets, but the warning signs were flashing. The MVP had a bad knee, and the playoffs were only getting harder. In the second round, they met the Boston Celtics, a team with size, strength, and deep playoff experience that was really just built to use every asset in its possession to beat anybody in a 7-game series. Embiid returned in Game 2 of the series wearing a brace, and from the very first possession, it was clear this was not the same player who had just won MVP. He moved slower as expected. His usual explosiveness, the spin moves, the coast-to-coast dribbles, the ferocious backdowns, wasn't really there. He looked stiff, cautious. His jump shot, once smooth and confident, clanked off the rim repeatedly. Boston didn't even need to send double teams most of the time, as Al Horford, at nearly 37 years old, was guarding him without much trouble. Embiid couldn't attack the basket. He was settling for fadeaways and elbow jump shots. Game after game, his performance dipped. Over the 7-game series, he averages 23 points per game, down nearly 10 points from his regular season averages, while his shooting fell to 43%. For a big man especially, one known for dominating in the painted area, that number was brutal. The MVP version of Embiid, the one who bullied defenders all season, was officially gone. What remained was a hesitant, limping shell of himself due to injury. And then came Game 6, the golden opportunity. The Sixers had still managed to jump out to a 3-2 series lead and were playing at home with the chance to eliminate Boston and move on to the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time in over 20 years. The crowd was electric. Philly could taste it. For 3 quarters, it was neck and neck. But in the fourth, with the game and series on the line, Embiid seemed to vanish. He scored 4 points in the final quarter. He wasn't demanding the ball, he didn't take over, the Sixers were outscored, and the game slipped away in a hurry. They lost 95-86, and suddenly it was 3-3, back in Boston where the pressure was sky high. And this is where the dream completely fell apart. Game 7 was not just a loss, it was an implosion, a collapse of everything Embiid had built all season. He finished with 15 points, he made just 5 of his 18 shots, an awful 27% shooting. For every jumper he took, the Celtics breathed a little easier. He was pretty passive, he was indecisive, his body looked heavy, like every step took effort. He grabbed only 8 rebounds and had 4 turnovers. As the Celtics pulled away, the cameras kept cutting to Embiid, sweating, frustrated, and defeated. The final score, 112-88, a blowout. The Sixers season was over. The MVP had left the building, and as the Celtics moved on, the basketball world looked back at the wreckage. Embiid, the league's most valuable player, had scored 15 points in the biggest game of the season. He had missed 13 shots and was outplayed, outworked, and outclassed. The same player who couldn't be stopped for 82 games suddenly couldn't buy a bucket when it mattered the most. The media, once praising him, turned quickly. Some called it a choke, others said he never deserved the MVP in the first place. All the questions returned. Is he durable enough? Can he handle pressure? Will he ever lead a team past the second round? Meanwhile, the player who finished second in MVP voting, Nikola Jokic, was still dominating, still winning, and on his way to a championship victory. The contrast was painful. One MVP was raising banners, the others was sitting at home watching. Embiid has certainly dumped a lot into his NBA career to give us glimpses of one of the greatest big guys we've ever seen. But as seen in his MVP season, glimpses is really the end of the story for Joel Embiid. Even after a season that was MVP level, maintaining his availability come playoff time at this point has proven to be an impossibility, which is just the sad reality of his career. Despite the collapse in 2023 being due to injury, this season really seemed like a culmination of all past problems. Injuries keeping him from 100% or off the floor entirely, playoff disappearances whether excusable or not, and another season playing second fiddle to the big man who truly owns 2020's basketball. In 2007, Dirk Nowitzki wasn't just dominating. He was basically single-handedly leading the Dallas Mavericks on a tear through the NBA that felt like revenge in motion. After the crushing heartbreak of the 06 finals, where a 2-0 series lead turned into a soul-shaking loss to the Miami Heat, and the big three of D-Wade, Shaquille O'Neal, and the referees, Dirk and the Mavs came back with purpose. They weren't angry, they were calculated, focused, ruthless, and led by their cold-blooded German forward. They didn't just win, they destroyed. Dallas won 67-15, the best record in franchise history, and for a long stretch in the middle of the season, they went 52-5. What the fuck was Dirk on, man? That's not just dominance, it's historical. They weren't squeaking past teams, they were grinding them into the ground. Every night, the Mavericks looked like a perfectly engineered machine. He averaged 24.6 points, 8.9 rebounds, and 3.4 assists, and shot a blistering 50% from the field, 42% from deep, and 90% from the line. Joining the ultra-exclusive 50-40-90 club, one of basketball's rarest marks of elite efficiency. But it wasn't just the numbers, it was how he did it. Dirk had become unguardable. Too tall for wings, too skilled for centers, and impossible to rush. His signature one-legged fadeaway was pure nightmare fuel for defenders, a move that looked like something you'd see in 2K Park, except it was real. And it was unstoppable. The Mavericks had shooters, defenders, depth, coaching. They looked like a team built to erase history. When Dirk was announced as the MVP, it felt like a coronation, not just an award. The league had watched him rise, fall, and return sharper than he ever was. But little did we know, we were about to watch one of the most insane upsets in NBA history. In the first round of the playoffs, the Mavericks met the We Believe Golden State Warriors, a scrappy 8 seed that had just barely clawed their way into the postseason. On paper, the matchup looked like a fucking lopsided matchup. This was the first time a 67-win team had faced a team that barely cleared 500. But in reality, it was a trap. Golden State had beaten Dallas all 3 times during the regular season. They were coached by Don Nelson, Dirk's old coach, and he knew exactly where to poke holes in Dallas's defense. He threw out ultra-small lineups, sped up the pace to a blur, and attacked the Mavericks for 48 minutes straight. And the Warriors had their own swagger. Led by Baron Davis, Steven Jackson, Jason Richardson, and backed by a roaring Oracle Arena, they didn't just believe they could win, they knew it. Game 1 was the warning shot. Dirk shot 4 of 16, the Mavericks looked confused, hesitant, and stunned. They bounced back in Game 2, but once the series moved to Oakland, the Warriors went nuclear. Oracle became a madhouse. The Warriors' energy swallowed the Mavericks whole. They blitzed Dirk with doubles, swarmed him on every catch, and baited him into isolation-heavy, inefficient possessions. The shots that had dropped all season now bounced off the rim. The fadeaways stopped falling, the confidence began to shake. Golden State took both games 3 and 4. The Mavericks pulled out a desperate win in Game 5, but by then, the Warriors could smell blood. In Game 6, with their season on the line, Dallas collapsed. Dirk, normally the Rock, cracked under pressure, scoring just 8 points on 2 of 13 shooting. The Warriors ran wild. Steven Jackson hit 7 threes, Baron Davis flew through the lane like a freight train, and the final score, 111-86, felt like an explosion. Fans stormed the court. The underdog had completed the impossible. It wasn't just an upset. For Dallas, it was a catastrophe. The Mavericks had won 67 games. Dirk was the MVP of the league. The Warriors had finished 25 games behind them. No 8 seed had ever done this before to a team this stacked. When Dirk walked off the court that night, it was with his shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow. In the locker room afterward, he reportedly hurled a trash can against the wall, denting it with frustration. He wasn't just defeated, he was humiliated. Days later, when Dirk officially accepted his MVP trophy, the moment felt wrong, awkward, and even a little cruel. The award, usually a celebration, became a spotlight on the failure. There was no parade, no final stage, no momentum, just cameras, applause that sounded more like a sigh, and a man holding a trophy that no longer felt like a crown. Dirk looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, and in a matter of days, he was. He vanished to Australia to escape the noise, the talk shows, the headlines, and the endless questions. The fall was steep. The narrative flipped fast, from Dirk's year to Dirk can't win in the playoffs, from MVP to cautionary tale. That series, that collapse, it stuck. For years, it was brought up every time the Mavericks entered the playoffs. And for Dirk, it was more than a stain. It became a scar. One that eventually hardens him. One that taught him how brutal the climb could be when you're carrying the weight of expectations. Years later, in 2011, Dirk would return to the finals and conquer it all, beating a Miami super team stacked with LeBron, D. Wade, and Chris Bosh. That time he had scars, he had experience, and he had the solution. He led Dallas to the title and finally shed the ghost of 2006 and 2007. But in the mythology of his career, 2007 remains the turning point. The moment he learned that greatness doesn't protect you from collapse, that even MVPs bleed, and that being the best player in the world means nothing if you fall when it counts most. Dirk's 2007 season was a basketball masterpiece that fell way short. 8 months of dominance undone in 1 week of chaos. And though his redemption would come, the pain of that year gave it weight. It was the storm he couldn't weather, the lesson he had to learn, the season that showed just how fragile greatness can be when belief turns into pressure and pressure turns into collapse. And when it was over, the only thing more impressive than Dirk's rise was how he came back from the fall. In 1999, Karl the Kid Cuddler was still a force in the league. Built like a brick shithouse, mechanical, and unshakably consistent for his age. At 35 years old, he wasn't soaring above the rim anymore, but he didn't really need to be. His game had aged into something cold and precise, like a machine built for one job. Grind defenders into dust. Coming off 2 straight finals losses to Michael Jordan's Bulls, the Millman returned after the lockout, determined to try to get that title. The season was strange, cut short to just 50 games due to a labor dispute, condensed and chaotic. Teams were disjointed, bodies were worn out, game plans looked rushed. But amid that chaos, Karl Malone stood tall, steering the Utah Jazz to a 37-13 record, tied for the best in the league, and captured his second MVP award. The numbers were solid. Nothing phenomenal by any means, 24, 9.4, and 4.1 per game on nearly 49% shooting. Not eye-popping compared to his earlier years, but solid, I guess. The pick and roll with Stockton remained reliable. Utah wasn't flashy, they weren't modern, but they were effective. And Malone was their anchor offensively and defensively. He was smart, durable, and battle-tested, but being reliable doesn't always mean being the best. But even with everything that Malone brought to the Jazz, the MVP still felt more like a nod of his resume than his dominance. Voters saw a familiar face on a top team and defaulted to a narrative of redemption. But there were at least 2 other players, Tim Duncan and Alonzo Mourning, who had better arguments for the award that year, especially when it came to impact on both ends of the floor. Duncan was only in his 2nd season, but already looked like the future of the league. He was the engine behind San Antonio's identical 37-13 record, posting 21.7 points and 11.4 rebounds while anchoring the best defense in the league. His presence on both ends of the floor completely changed the Spurs altogether, and unlike Malone, Duncan was doing this with a roster that hadn't already made deep playoff runs together for like a whole goddamn decade. He was lifting San Antonio to the top of the league. Then there was Alonzo Mourning. the emotional and physical core of the Miami Heat, who averaged 20 points, 11 rebounds, and over 3 blocks per game while taking home Defensive Player of the Year. He was the league's most dominant interior defender, the centerpiece of one of the greatest defenses in recent memory. If you were building a team from scratch and had to win in that short and brutal 1999 season, there was a real argument that morning if Duncan would have given you way more than Karl Malone. But Karl won. Maybe because voters weren't ready to hand the keys to the league to the younger generation, maybe because in a season defined by uncertainty, Malone offered something familiar, something safe, and for that, he walked away with the trophy. In the first round, Malone and the Jazz barely scraped past the Sacramento Kings in 5 games. He was fine, but far from dominant. Then came Portland in the second round, a team brimming with youth and edge. Rasheed Wallace, Brian Grant, Arvydas Sabonis, a frontcourt rotation that didn't back down, didn't tire, and didn't care about their opponents' legacies. Suddenly, Malone's game was looking his age. Predictable. Over 5 games, he still put up his usual stats of 24 and 11, but shot around 40% from the field as a big man and averaged over 4 turnovers per game. That mid-post jump shot that had been his bread and butter started to clank, and slowly, the Jazz were pushed out of their rhythm and out of the playoffs. But it wasn't just the numbers, it was the feel of the game. Malone didn't look like the best player in the world. He didn't take over, he didn't impose his game into the series in any way. He didn't inspire fear, his game was more effort than electricity. His decisions more cautious than courageous. I mean, if only he was that cautious whenever he was doing that stuff earlier in his career. Never mind, I guess. To make things worse, the finals played out like a cruel mirror. Tim Duncan, the man Malone beat out for the MVP, absolutely dominated the big stage. The Spurs faced the New York Knicks, and Duncan dismantled them. He averaged 27, 14, and over 2 blocks per game. He took over, he led, he closed. Duncan looked like the MVP. Malone looked like a guy watching from home, which is what he was. And that's the part that stings. MVP isn't a lifetime achievement award. It's not a gold watch for being consistent. It's about who controlled the season, who shaped the league, and by the time the dust settled, it was clear that Malone's season was more about reputation than rule. Even his MVP acceptance felt awkward. Came after elimination, alone on a stage, smiling through gritted teeth. There's no parade, no playoff success to match the honor, just a trophy that suddenly looked too heavy to lift, and a season that ended not in glory but in silence. Looking back, 1999 doesn't tarnish Malone's legacy. He's still one of the best power forwards ever, but that MVP, that one doesn't shine quite as bright. Not when Duncan ascended right before our eyes, not when Mourning anchored his team with unmatched intensity, and not when Malone just faded when he was supposed to be at his most valuable. Before super teams was even a concept, before MVPs were surrounded by stars and supported by elite coaching staffs, there was the earlier Malone, Moses. And in 1982, he stood alone. That year, Moses wasn't just the league's best player, he was a force of nature. While others had help, Moses had a team barely hanging on after a finals run the year before. No second star, no spark off the bench, no clever scheme, just Moses night after night, dragging the Houston Rockets through one of the toughest, most physical eras in NBA history with nothing but his power, his motor, and a mindset that refused to quit. He averaged 31 points, 14.7 rebounds, and 1.5 blocks per game across 82 matchups, all while being double and triple teamed like it was standard practice. He led the league in rebounding for the second straight year, posted 66 double-doubles, and made sure the Rockets stayed competitive, even as the roster struggled to stay afloat. Houston's final record, 46-36. Solid, I guess, but far from spectacular. Still, most people understood the truth. Without Moses, that team would have been lucky to win 25 games. His dominance wasn't about flash, it was about consistency, strength, and an unmatched motor to do all the dirty work, while also scoring every other basket. He earned the MVP not because his team was elite, but because he was. While other stars had systems built around them, Moses was the system. He played through contact, punished teams on the glass, and made opponents miserable for 48 minutes every goddamn night. In a league filled with talented big men, Moses was still something different. He wasn't just rebounding, he was controlling entire games by owning the entire painted area. He didn't need the ball handed to him in the perfect spot, he went and got it. Off missed shots, off broken plays, off sheer effort, he didn't slow down. Game after game, night after night, he brought the same intensity, the same work ethic, and the same production. It wasn't always pretty, it wasn't designed for highlights, but it worked. Then came the postseason, and everything just crumbled apart. The Rockets faced the Supersonics in the opening round, a best-of-3 series that offered no room for error. Seattle had a tough veteran roster, led by Jack Sikma, and knew exactly what to do. Take Moses out of the game and make the rest of Houston beat them. They collapsed the paint, sent help on every touch, and dared the Rockets supporting cast to make a shot. Moses still managed 25 points and 15 rebounds a game, but his field goal percentage plummeted to 38% from the field, a sign of just how much pressure he was under. Every possession became a battle. Every move was met with 2 defenders, sometimes 3, and while Moses kept grinding, the support simply wasn't there. The Rockets couldn't stretch the floor, couldn't match Seattle's depth, and couldn't find answers. They lost the series 2-1, and just like that, the MVP season was over. The reaction wasn't harsh, but it was telling. No one questioned Moses' greatness. He had done too much for that already, but the early exit left a strange silence around his MVP season. He had been the most dominant player in the league, but the playoffs didn't give him the stage to show it. There was no second round, no marquee matchup, no redemption arc, just a hard ending to the season full of hard work. It was a quiet, frustrating way for a legendary season to close. Yet in some ways, that 1982 season still shines. Maybe even more because of how difficult it was. It's easy to praise MVPs who led 60-win teams surrounded by all-stars and deep rotations. It's harder to recognize a player who carried a team without a safety net. But that's exactly what Moses did. He didn't have the tools most MVPs rely on, and still he led the league in rebounds, scored over 30 a game, played nearly every night, and gave Houston a shot to compete when no one else could. It was one of the purest examples of individual value the NBA had ever seen. And of course, Moses didn't stay down for long. The very next year he joined Julius Erving in the Philadelphia 76ers, and finally had the support he needed. The result, one of the most dominant playoff runs in NBA history, capped off by a championship and another MVP trophy. But that moment doesn't quite hit the same without the pain of 1982. That year, Moses proved what one player could do on his own. He showed that willpower, strength, and effort still mattered, even in a league moving towards stars and structure. In the end, Moses' 1982 season stands not just as a statistical triumph, but as a story of endurance, a reminder of what it means to carry, to lead, and to fight, even when the odds are too high, the support too thin, and the spotlight too dim. He may not have gone far in the playoffs, but he went further than anyone else could have with what he had. That year was a masterclass in doing the impossible over and over again. In his second season, Bill Russell was already being etched into the granite of basketball history. Coming off a championship as a rookie, a feat few have ever touched, he wasted no time in taking over the league with something it had never quite seen before: defense as dominance. In an NBA era obsessed with scoring, Russell flipped the narrative entirely. He turned the paint into a no-fly zone. He rebounded the ball like a machine built for chaos. In the 1957-1958 season, he put up an absurd 22.7 rebounds per game, an almost incomprehensible number even by the standards of the 50s. That raw production, his ability to dictate the pace, start fast breaks, and swallow possessions earned him the league's MVP award, and in many ways, it felt right. He anchored the Boston Celtics like a storm anchor in violent seas, and even though he averaged a modest 16.6 points per game, the league saw something different in Russell, value that didn't always live on the stat sheet. But that didn't mean the flaws weren't real, because as dominant as he was on the defensive end, on offense, Russell was still very much a work in progress. His 40% field goal percentage was a red flag, especially for a center whose shots came almost exclusively at the rim. He didn't have a polished post game, he wasn't a go-to scorer in half-court sets, his value was more playing a role for his team. Screening, rebounding, running the floor, making the extra pass, he was the motor, not the weapon. And when the Celtics reached the NBA Finals again in 1958, those limitations weren't just visible, they were fatal. Matched up with Bob Pettit and the St. Louis Hawks in a rematch of the previous year's finals, Russell faced a different kind of war. Pettit wasn't just a scorer, he was a flamethrower. Where Russell smothered opponents with length and anticipation, Pettit fought back with finesse and relentlessness, putting on an absolute clinic in the series. Russell's numbers dipped to just 14 points per game on an abysmal 35% shooting from the floor. As a 6'9" big man, playing against men getting off work from their 9 to 5 at the construction site. A steep drop from his already limited regular season efficiency, and while he still vacuumed up rebounds, it wasn't enough to counterbalance the offensive load he couldn't carry. Meanwhile, Pettit was putting on one of the greatest NBA Finals performances in history. He averaged 29 points and 17 rebounds in the series. And in the decisive Game 6, he dropped a staggering 50 piece against one of the most feared defenses of all time. It was the kind of performance that swung legacies. With Russell injured mid-series and unable to suit up for that final game, Boston simply couldn't survive the barrage. The Hawks took the title 4-2, and while Russell's absence in Game 6 gave Boston fans something to point to, the numbers across the entire series told a broader story. Russell had been outplayed by Pettit, and not just slightly, but by a mile on the scoreboard, and by a galaxy in terms of offensive impact. And not just slightly, but by a mile on the scoreboard, and by a galaxy in terms of offensive impact. Looking back, the 1958 MVP feels like a bit of a contradiction. Yes, Russell anchored the best team in the league. Yes, his defense and rebounding were generational, even era-defining, but he wasn't the most complete player that year. He wasn't even the best player on the floor in the finals. Pettit was. And with legends like Elgin Baylor entering the league and other stars like Dolph Schayes and Bob Cousy still making waves, you could argue that Russell's MVP was more about symbolism, a nod to Boston Boston's rise and Russell's disruptive brilliance, then about all-around supremacy. Of course, Russell would go on to win 11 titles and forever redefine how winning was measured. He was the ultimate team-first superstar, the axis on which one of the sport's greatest dynasties turned. But in 1958, the second-year center was still growing into the role of most valuable, and the flaws in his offensive game loomed large when it mattered the most. That year's MVP didn't ride into the sunset with a crown. He limped off the courts, titleless, outgunned by a rival whose scoring did all the talking. Pettit got the ring, Russell got the trophy, and for all the greatness Russell would eventually achieve, the 1958 season remains a moment where his individual acclaim outpaced his postseason performance, a reminder that even legends aren't immune to growing pains. Thank you for watching if you made it this far, and as always, I'll see you boys in the next one. Peace out.